He slammed the pen down on a $950 million contract and walked out the door holding his 6-year-old daughter's hand. The room went dead silent. Suits worth more than most people's cars. Names on buildings. Old money, new power, and every single one of them watched him leave. They thought he was finished. They had no idea he was just getting started. If you're watching this from somewhere out there, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if no one's told you yet today, hit subscribe. You're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Now, let me tell you the full story. Ethan Carter didn't sleep the night before the biggest meeting of his life. Not because he was nervous about the numbers, he knew those cold. Revenue projections, market penetration rates, 5-year growth models. He'd been over them so many times the figures felt like his own heartbeat. Know what kept him awake that night was the sound of small feet padding down the hallway at 2 in the morning and a little voice at his bedroom door saying, "Daddy, I had the dream again." He didn't hesitate. He pulled back the covers and made room. Lily climbed in beside him, tucked her head under his chin, the way she always did, the way that still made something tighten in his chest. Because it was the exact same way her mother used to sleep, and within 4 minutes, she was out cold. Ethan lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, one arm around his daughter, and a mind that refused to quiet down. $950 million. He turned the number over in his head like a stone he kept finding in his pocket. The Hawthorne family. Old money. Serious money. The kind of investment that didn't just change a company, it redefined what was possible. International expansion. A research division he'd been dreaming about for 3 years. The chance to stop scrambling and start building something that would last. He had worked toward this for a decade, and today, technically, since it was already past 2, it was finally within reach. He kissed the top of Lily's head and told himself to sleep. He didn't. By 5:45, he was in the kitchen making coffee and packing Lily's lunch, moving quietly so she could sleep another hour. Ham and cheese, no mustard. She'd gone through a phase 6 months ago where she hated mustard with the kind of passionate conviction most adults reserved for politics. He cut the crusts off the bread, packed apple slices, added a little note folded in half the way her mother used to do it back when there had been a mother to do such things. "You're my favorite part of every day, Dad." He'd been writing those notes for 2 years now, started right after the grief counselor suggested it, kept doing it long after the grief counselor was gone because Lily started keeping the notes in a shoebox under her bed, and one afternoon, he'd found her reading them like they were letters from somewhere very far away. He pressed the folded paper into the corner of her lunchbox and clicked the lid shut. His phone buzzed on the counter. His assistant Marcus already up, already working. Cars confirmed for 8:15. Conference room opens at 9. Hawthorns have pre-reviewed the deck. You're in good shape, E. Ethan typed back, "Copy, thanks." Then he put the phone face down and stood at the kitchen window with his coffee, watching the early light come up gray and slow over the neighbors' rooftops. Good shape. He almost laughed at that. How was 32 years old, running a company that employed 340 people, carrying a grief he'd never fully put down, and raising a 6-year-old girl who still had the dream. Sometimes the one where her mom was in the kitchen and then wasn't, and the kitchen was empty, and Lily was calling, and nobody answered. Good shape, sure. He woke Lily at 7. She came awake the way she always did, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. Her eyes opened, and she was immediately talking. Dad, I figured out why caterpillars turn into butterflies." He sat on the edge of her bed. "Tell me." "Because they get tired of crawling." She said it with complete certainty, the way 6-year-olds state things that sound impossible and somehow land exactly right. He smiled. "That's probably the best explanation I've ever heard." "I know." She sat up and reached for her stuffed rabbit, an ancient thing named Gerald, who had been through 2 wash cycles too many and was missing one eye. "Are you going to your big meeting today?" "Yeah, baby, today's the day." She studied him with those dark, serious eyes she'd inherited from Claire, eyes that saw more than they should at her age. "Are you nervous?" "A little." "Don't be." She held Gerald out toward him with the solemnity of someone offering a sacred object. You can borrow him if you want. Ethan looked at the one-eyed rabbit for a long moment. Then he reached out and squeezed Gerald's soft ear gently. I think you need him more than I do, but thank you. She seemed to accept that. She was already swinging her legs off the bed thinking about breakfast. The call came at 8:03. Ethan was knotting his tie in the bathroom mirror when his phone lit up with a number he recognized, Mrs. Patterson, the school office coordinator. He answered on the second ring. This is Ethan Carter. Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry for the short notice. We have a plumbing emergency here at Jefferson Elementary. The main line on the second floor has burst, and we're having to close the building for the day. Students should not come in. I'm calling all the families now. Today. The word came out sharper than he intended. Right now today. I understand it's terrible timing. No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson. It's not your fault. Thank you for calling. He hung up and stood very still in the bathroom for exactly 4 seconds. Then he picked up the phone and called Mrs. Alvarez. She was Lily's usual sitter, a retired grandmother 4 houses down, who Lily adored and who had a standing agreement with Ethan for last-minute situations. The call went straight to voicemail. He called Marcus. Can you reach anyone on the emergency sitter list? He asked, already moving, already pulling up contacts on his laptop. On it, Marcus said. Give me 10 minutes. The 10 minutes came and went. Marcus called back. Ethan, I'm sorry. Sandra's out of state. The agency has nobody available on this short a notice. Their earliest available is 11, and your meeting is at 9. I'm stuck. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I can call Hawthorne's office, Marcus said carefully. Request a postponement. They might... No. Ethan said it without hesitation. We've already rescheduled twice because of their calendar. We reschedule again, we lose them. So what do we do? Ethan walked to the doorway of Lily's room. She was sitting on the floor with Gerald in her lap, carefully coloring the pages of a book about ocean animals, her tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. She looked up at him. I made a decision. Lily, you're coming with Dad today, but I need you to be really good, okay? Really quiet, really patient. Can you do that? She looked at him the way she sometimes did, older than 6 somehow, taking the question seriously. Then she nodded once, decisive and sure. I can do that, Dad. He exhaled. Okay. He turned back toward his room. Get your backpack. Bring your coloring book. And bring Gerald. Is Gerald allowed at the meeting? Ethan grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair. Gerald goes wherever you go. They made it into the car by 8:30. Lily sat in the back seat with her backpack on her lap, wearing her best dress. The dark blue one with small white flowers that she'd chosen herself from the closet. Because, as she'd explained with complete logic, if you're going somewhere important, you have to look important too. Ethan had not told her to wear it. She'd just known. He watched her in the rearview mirror as he pulled out of the driveway. She was looking out the window at the passing neighborhood, calm and settled, like this was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. He felt something move in his chest. He didn't have a name for it exactly. It was too complicated, too layered. Pride and love and exhaustion, and something that might have been wonder at this small, serious person who had decided without being asked to show up for him. Dad. Yeah. What's the meeting for? To talk to some people about my company. They might want to invest in it. What's invest mean? It means they'd give us money to help the company grow bigger. She considered this. Like when I gave Tyler my cookie at lunch so he'd let me have a turn on the swings. Ethan almost laughed. Yeah, sort of exactly like that. Did it work out for Tyler? She asked. I don't know yet, he said. We'll see. She nodded and went back to looking out the window, apparently satisfied with that answer. The Hawthorne Group occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in the financial district, the kind of building that announced itself before you were anywhere near it all. Clean lines and reflective surfaces designed to make everyone approaching it feel slightly smaller than they actually were. Ethan parked and came around to unbuckle Lily from her seat. She climbed out and immediately took his hand, looking up at the building without any visible reaction, the way children sometimes look at enormous things without the weight of what they're supposed to mean. It's shiny, she said. Yeah. Our building is nicer. He squeezed her hand. Don't tell them that. They walked through the glass doors and crossed the lobby together. Ethan in his jacket and Lily in her blue dress with the white flowers. Gerald tucked securely in the front pocket of her backpack with his one-button eye facing out. The receptionist looked up from her desk. Her eyes went from Ethan to Lily and back to Ethan, and her expression shifted by just a fraction, not unkind exactly, but unmistakably surprised. Ethan Carter, he said for the 9 o'clock with the Hawthorne Group. Of course. She recovered quickly, professional. I'll let them know you've arrived. If you'd like to go up 38th floor, the elevator bank on your left. Thank you. In the elevator, Lily leaned against his leg and looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors. She stuck out her tongue at herself, then immediately stood straight again, businesslike, like she was practicing. Ethan watched her and felt something settle in him. Whatever was waiting on the 38th floor, he was ready. He had to be. She was counting on him, and he was counting on her. The elevator doors opened to a hallway that smelled like old wood and something expensive leather maybe, or just the particular scent of accumulated wealth. A junior associate in a dark suit was waiting for them. His name was Preston, according to his lapel pin, and he had the careful, calibrated expression of someone who was very good at not reacting to things. He almost held it together when he saw Lily. Almost. Mr. Carter. He extended his hand. Welcome. The partners are ready for you in... His eyes dropped briefly to Lily. In the main conference room. Thank you, Ethan said. My daughter will be joining me this morning. She'll sit quietly. She won't be a disruption. Preston nodded too quickly, Ethan noticed. Of course, right this way. He led them down the hall toward a set of heavy double doors, and before he pushed them open, Ethan crouched down to Lily's eye level. Hey! He looked at her directly. Whatever happens in there, you are not the problem. You hear me? Me, not the problem. You're just a kid who came to work with her dad. That's it. She looked back at him steadily. I know, Dad. She said it the way Claire used to say things she absolutely believed without needing to be told, with a kind of quiet, immovable certainty. He stood up. Preston opened the doors, and they walked in. The conference room was everything Ethan had expected, and nothing he could have fully prepared for. Long table. Dark wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. 6 men and 2 women arranged in the specific formation of people who have been in power so long. They've forgotten what it felt like not to be settled, unhurried, the kind of comfortable that only comes from 3 or 4 generations of never having to worry. Richard Hawthorne sat at the head of the table. 60-something, white-haired, the patriarch, the man whose name was on the fund, whose signature made things real. He had the eyes of someone who had seen a great many things and formed a great many opinions and was generally not interested in revising them. To his right sat his son, Gareth, mid-30s, the sharpest dresser in the room, with the expression of a man who believed every room he walked into was being ranked and that he was usually winning. Ethan walked in. He put his materials on the table. He pulled out the chair he'd been assigned and settled Lily in the chair beside him, slipping her backpack over her shoulders and quietly unzipping the front pocket so she could reach her coloring book. I didn't apologize for her presence. He didn't explain. He just pulled out his materials and looked up at the room with the calm, level expression of a man who had nothing to apologize for. Thank you for having me, he said. I'm Ethan Carter. I've been looking forward to this conversation. For 3 or 4 seconds, no one said anything. Then Richard Hawthorne leaned back in his chair and looked at him with an expression that was almost not quite, but almost amused. Mr. Carter, he said, welcome. He glanced at Lily, who had already opened her coloring book to a page with a blue whale and was reaching into her backpack for her box of colored pencils. Is this? Hawthorne paused. A family meeting. And across the table, Gareth Hawthorne smiled in a way that had absolutely nothing warm in it. Or did the babysitter cancel? The laughter that followed was quiet, restrained. The kind of laughter that knows it's in a boardroom and adjusts its volume accordingly. But laughter was laughter. Ethan heard it. And across the table, Lily's hand paused over her coloring book. Just for a moment, her pencil hovering above the whale before she pressed down and kept going like she hadn't noticed. But Ethan had seen the pause. He filed it away somewhere deep and steady inside himself, in the place where men store the things that will matter later. And he opened his folder. "Let's talk about why I'm here," he said. His voice was completely calm. What those men at that table didn't know yet, what they wouldn't understand until it was far too late, was that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't Richard Hawthorne. It wasn't Gareth. It wasn't any of the lawyers, or the financial analysts, or the men who had built walls out of money and called them foundations. It was a 32-year-old single father who had learned something that no Ivy League degree and no inherited fortune had ever taught them: that the moment you make a man choose between his dignity and your money, you've already lost him. They just didn't know it yet. Ethan had given this presentation 43 times. Not this exact presentation. This one was refined, tightened, the product of 18 months of data and 6 weeks of preparation specifically for the Hawthorne Group. But the act of standing before a room full of skeptical people and making them believe in something they couldn't yet see, he'd done that 43 times. In church basements and co-working spaces and windowless conference rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. Before angel investors who looked at him like he was wasting their Thursday afternoon. Before venture capitalists who checked their phones while he talked. Before a bank loan officer who had told him point blank that his idea was interesting but not investable. He had learned across those 43 rooms how to read the temperature of an audience before the first slide even loaded. And the temperature in this room was already below freezing. It wasn't loud about it. That was the thing about old money, it rarely needed to raise its voice. The contempt was architectural. It was in the angle of Gareth Hawthorne's chair, turned just slightly away from the table, like a man who had already decided he was elsewhere. It was in the way one of the female partners, her nameplate read, Diane Cole. Senior Director held her pen horizontally between both index fingers, tapping one end and then the other in a slow, patient rhythm, the body language of a woman waiting for something to be over. It was in the 3 quiet words Preston the associate had said when he escorted them in and closed the double doors behind him, not to Ethan, but murmured to the man beside him, mouth barely moving, and Ethan hadn't caught the words themselves, only the shape of them and the small exhale of amusement that followed. He knew that shape. He'd grown up around it. It was the sound of a room that had already voted. But Ethan Carter had walked into rooms that had already voted before, and he had changed some of those votes. He clicked to his first slide. "I want to start not with numbers," he said, "but with a problem." Richard Hawthorne, who had been studying the view from the window with the serene detachment of a man who owned better views at home, shifted his eyes back to the screen. "The enterprise software market," Ethan continued, "is built on a fundamental lie, and every major player in it, every one of your current portfolio companies included, is either participating in that lie or suffering because of it." That got the room's attention. Not dramatically, no one sat forward or put down their phones. But Diane Cole stopped tapping her pen. Gareth Hawthorne's chin came up slightly. 2 of the analysts near the far end of the table made eye contact with each other, and that eye contact said, "Okay, that was interesting." Ethan let the silence work for him. He had learned that too, how silence in a room full of powerful people was like a vacuum, and if you created it, they felt compelled to fill it. And if they filled it, they were already inside your presentation, rather than watching it from the outside. He clicked to the next slide. Companies spend an average of 23% of their operational budget on software licensing integration and the human cost of managing systems that don't talk to each other. I'm not making that up. That's a number from your own portfolio reports, the ones your team sent my team as part of the due diligence packet. I read them. All of them. Richard Hawthorne's eyes moved from the screen to Ethan, and for the first time since Ethan had walked into the room, the older man looked at him with something resembling genuine attention. "That 23%, Ethan said, is the problem. My company is the solution." He built from there. Methodically, confidently, the way he'd been building things since he was 23 years old, with 1 employee and a server he'd bought second-hand off Craigslist. He walked them through the platform architecture. He showed them the integration data from their existing clients, 47 enterprise customers, retention rate of 94%, average implementation time of 11 days, against an industry standard of 63. He showed them the growth trajectory. He showed them the international expansion model, and the 3 markets they'd already begun piloting in, without any outside investment. He didn't oversell. He didn't inflate. He didn't do what he'd seen too many founders do in rooms like this one: mistake enthusiasm for persuasion or volume for confidence. He just showed them the truth, and the truth was very good. 15 minutes in, Diane Cole had set down her pen entirely and was leaning forward with her elbows on the table, her reading glasses on, studying the slide on the screen with the focused expression of a woman running math in her head. 20 minutes in, one of the analysts at the far end was typing notes quickly, not the polite-looking notes of someone documenting a meeting, but the urgent, cramped notes of someone trying to keep up with information that was moving fast. 25 minutes in, Richard Hawthorne said, "Stop there." And Ethan stopped, and the older man pointed at the retention metric on the screen. 94% retention. Across what kind of clients? Mid-market to enterprise. Revenue range of $50 million to $800 million. Mix of manufacturing, logistics, financial services, and healthcare. And the 6% you lost. Ethan didn't flinch. 2 companies were acquired and absorbed their acquirers' existing systems. One went under unrelated to our platform. They had an executive fraud situation. One canceled after 6 months because they didn't have the internal IT capacity to maximize what we were giving them. We've since built an onboarding support program that addresses exactly that gap. We haven't lost a client since implementing it. Hawthorne studied him for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, not an approval exactly, but a concession. The nod of a man acknowledging that an answer was complete. "Continue," he said. And for a few minutes in that room it felt like business. Just business. Just a founder and his data and a group of serious investors doing what serious investors do. Trying to figure out if the numbers were real. If the man behind the numbers was real. If the opportunity was what it appeared to be. And then Gareth Hawthorne turned and looked at Lily. She was sitting exactly as she'd promised, perfectly still. Her coloring book open in front of her, a set of colored pencils, arranged by color in a precise line along the edge of the table beside her. She'd done that herself quietly while Ethan was talking with the methodical care of a child who takes her organizational system seriously. She was coloring the blue whale. She'd filled in the body with a deep midnight blue and was now working on the tail. Her tongue pressed to her upper lip, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had not made a single sound. She had not asked for anything. She had not looked up once. But Gareth Hawthorne looked at her, and then he looked at the people around the table with a particular expression. The expression of a man at a dinner party who has just found a cigarette butt in the salad bowl and is deciding whether to say something or simply communicate his discovery through eyebrows alone. He chose eyebrows. The man to his left caught it, suppressed a smile. The woman beside him, younger. Another associate, or perhaps a junior partner, shifted slightly in her seat and looked down at her notepad. Ethan caught all of it. He registered it the way he registered everything in rooms like this, not by looking directly at it, but by keeping it in his peripheral vision, while his face stayed level and his voice stayed measured and his presentation kept moving forward. He was almost at the end. He clicked to the final slide. "The ask," he said, "is $950 million over 18 months in 3 tranches, tied to pre-agreed expansion milestones. In exchange, the Hawthorne Group receives a 14% equity stake, 2 board seats, and pro rata rights on future financing rounds. I've already spoken with your legal team about the term sheet structure. We're aligned on the core mechanics. What I'm here today to establish is whether we're aligned on something more fundamental." He paused. "Whether we want to build something together." The room was quiet. It was a different quiet than before. Not the cold quiet of dismissal. The charged quiet of a room that had been moved not all the way, not yet, but enough. The quiet of people who had come in expecting to be mildly impressed at best, and were now running calculations they hadn't anticipated needing to run. Richard Hawthorne was the one who broke it. "I have questions," he said. "Of course. The international pilots. You mentioned 3 markets. Which ones and what's the current traction? And they were off into the real conversation, the one that happened after the presentation, when the room stopped performing and started actually talking. Hawthorne asked about the APAC pilot, and Ethan walked him through the Singapore and Tokyo data. Diane Cole asked about the regulatory landscape in the healthcare sector, and Ethan pulled up a supplemental slide he'd prepared specifically for that question, which made her blink in a way that meant she hadn't expected him to have it. One of the analysts asked about the technical architecture's scalability ceiling, and Ethan gave him an answer that was so specific and technically detailed that the analyst stopped taking notes and just listened, which was the highest compliment a technical analyst could pay. For 22 minutes, they talked like equals. And for 22 minutes, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt since the last time a deal had come together in a room, the peculiar kinetic energy of a thing actually working. The sense that numbers and trust and timing had aligned, and that the person across the table was beginning to see what you could see, and the distance between where you were and where you wanted to be was collapsing in real time. He almost let himself believe it, and then the 23rd minute arrived. It was a small moment, the way the things that change everything usually are. Lily reached to the edge of the table for her blue pencil, the one she'd placed in the careful line beside her coloring book. Her elbow caught the edge of her pencil case, a small zippered pouch with cartoon fish on it, and it slid off the edge of the table. It made a soft sound when it hit the floor. A muffled plastic clatter, barely audible. Lily froze. She looked at her father. He gave her the smallest nod. "It's okay. Pick it up." And she slipped down from her chair, retrieved the pencil case from the carpet, and climbed back up without a word. The whole thing took 7 seconds. Gareth Hawthorne watched those 7 seconds like they were a stock ticker delivering unwelcome news. "You know," he said, and his voice had a new quality, now conversational, almost friendly, the way a blade can be, almost friendly before it opens something. "I have to say, Mr. Carter, I've been in this business for 12 years, and I've sat across the table from a lot of founders." Ethan waited. "But I have to be honest." Gareth picked up his pen and clicked it once, twice. "I've never had one bring his daughter to the negotiation." The temperature changed. It was subtle, but it was real. Like the air pressure in the room had shifted 1 degree. My daughter was with me because of an unexpected situation this morning," Ethan said. His voice was even. "She's been no disruption." "Oh, no," Gareth said. And the friendliness in his voice got warmer and emptier, at the same time the way cheap champagne tastes sweeter the closer it is to going bad. "I'm not saying she's a disruption. She's been very well behaved, really." He glanced at Lily briefly, that same glancing at an inconvenient object quality, and then back to Ethan. "I'm just making an observation about judgment." "What judgment would that be?" Ethan asked. The room was very still. Gareth clicked his pen again. "This is a $950 million conversation, Ethan. Can I call you Ethan?" "Mr. Carter is fine." The temperature dropped another degree. Gareth absorbed that without visible reaction, which was itself a kind of reaction. "This is a $950 million conversation, Mr. Carter. My family has been in this business since before you were born. The people we partner with, the ones we write 9-figure checks, to those are people who have demonstrated a capacity for a certain kind of focus, a certain kind of total commitment." "I've demonstrated that," Ethan said. "The data you've spent the last 2 hours reviewing is the demonstration." "The data is impressive," Gareth said. And he said it the way someone says the food is nice at a restaurant they will never return to. "But data tells you what someone has done. It doesn't tell you what they're like. And what I'm observing sitting here is a man who," he paused, turned his pen in his fingers, "who seems to have certain complications in his personal life that make me wonder about the bandwidth available for what we would require of a CEO at this stage of growth." The word complications sat in the center of the table between them, like something that had been dropped there. Ethan said nothing for a moment. In that moment, he was aware of several things simultaneously. He was aware of Lily beside him, still coloring, still quiet, still trying so hard to be invisible, and so completely failing at invisibility, by virtue of being exactly who she was. a small, real present human being who could not be unseen. He was aware of Richard Hawthorne at the head of the table, who had said nothing since Gareth started talking, and whose silence was doing something, though Ethan wasn't yet sure what. He was aware of Diane Cole, who had put her pen down again, but differently this time, not forward with interest, but settled back, creating distance, the posture of a woman deciding not to be involved in whatever this was. And he was aware of something shifting inside himself. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter and more dangerous than anger. The thing that happened when a room that had been evaluating his work suddenly revealed that it had been evaluating something else entirely. "Can I ask you something, Gareth?" He used the first name deliberately. Even. Gareth raised his eyebrows. "Permission granted," the eyebrows said with the particular graciousness of a man who believed permission was his to grant. "In the last 2 hours," Ethan said, "you've reviewed a platform with 94% client retention, 340% year-over-year growth in the last fiscal period, 47 enterprise clients, generating $47 million in ARR, and international pilots showing early adoption rates that put us in the top 8% of comparable market entries in those regions." He paused. "Is there a single metric in that presentation that suggests my family circumstances have impaired my ability to run this company?" Gareth opened his mouth. "A single one," Ethan said. Gareth closed his mouth. Diane Cole looked at Richard Hawthorne, at the head of the table, was looking at Ethan with an expression that was genuinely difficult to read. A complex expression, layered, the expression of a man running a calculation that had more variables than the ones on the slides. "No," Gareth finally said, and his voice had lost some of its performed warmth. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying that the kind of commitment we require." "I've demonstrated commitment," Ethan said. "Every quarter, every metric, every client relationship, every team decision for the last 3 years, while simultaneously doing exactly what you're standing in front of right now and calling a complication. It has not slowed me down. It has not impaired my judgment. If anything." He paused, and something in his voice shifted, not louder but deeper, the way a river gets deeper when the banks narrow. "If anything, it has made me better at what I do, because I don't have the luxury of making decisions I'd be ashamed of when I get home." The room was silent in a new way. Not the cold silence of dismissal. Not the charged silence of people being convinced. The uncertain silence of a room that had just watched something happen that it hadn't prepared for. Richard Hawthorne said, "Let's take a break." Preston led Ethan and Lily to a smaller waiting room down the hall, glass-walled, furnished with a low couch and a coffee table, and a service tray with water and a bowl of mixed nuts that Lily immediately eyed with serious intent. "Can I have some?" she asked Ethan. "Yeah." He sat down beside her. "Go ahead." She reached carefully into the bowl and selected exactly 3 cashews, arranged them in a row on the knee of her dress, and ate them one at a time with great deliberation. "Dad," she said between the first and second cashew. "Yeah. That man with the blue tie doesn't like me being here." It wasn't a question. Ethan looked at her. At 6 years old, Lily Carter could read a room with an accuracy that some adults never developed. She'd always been that way, tuned in to the emotional frequency of the people around her, picking up signals that most children never noticed, and many grown-ups missed entirely. He thought about lying. About saying, "Oh no, baby, everyone's been very nice." He thought about the gentle protective lie that parents tell to preserve their children from the weight of things that aren't theirs to carry. But Lily had Claire's eyes, and Claire had never had much patience for protective lies. "Just tell me the truth," Claire used to say. "I can handle the truth. What I can't handle is finding out later that you didn't trust me with it." "He doesn't understand why you're here," Ethan said. "That's different from not liking you." "What doesn't he understand? He thinks business and family are supposed to be completely separate, like 2 rooms that should never have a door between them." Lily considered this, picking up her second cashew. "That's kind of sad." "Yeah," Ethan said. "It is." "Does he have kids?" Ethan thought about Gareth Hawthorne, the impeccable suit, the clicked pen, the casual surgical quality of his condescension. the ease with which he'd used the word complications to describe a child. "I don't know," Ethan said. "Maybe." "If he does," Lily said, eating the third cashew, "I hope they know he loves them." Ethan stared at his daughter for a moment. "Me too, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Me too." She dusted off her dress and reached for Gerald in her backpack, settled the rabbit in her lap, and opened her coloring book back to the whale. Ethan leaned his elbows on his knees and looked at the glass wall across from them, at the faint reflection of himself and his daughter, in the surface distorted slightly, the way reflections in glass always are never quite exact. He pulled out his phone. He had a missed call from Marcus and 3 emails from his head of engineering. Normal things, real things, the everyday weight of running a company that existed entirely separately from this glass building and these people and this conversation. He looked at the top email. It was from a client in Dallas, a long-term customer who just renewed their contract. Subject line: "Team absolutely loves the new update. You've changed how we work." He read it twice. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and sat with his daughter in the quiet waiting room while whatever was happening in the conference room down the hall ran its course. Preston returned 14 minutes later. "They're ready for you," he said. Ethan stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Lily, who was looking back at him with clear, steady eyes over the top of Gerald's head. "You okay?" she asked him. He almost laughed. She was 6. She had a one-eyed rabbit and a coloring book and cashew dust on her dress, and she was asking him if he was okay. "Yeah," he said. "I'm good." "You got this, Dad." He picked up her backpack and held out his hand, and she took it, and they walked back down the hall together toward the double doors. Preston pushed them open. The room had reorganized itself in a way that Ethan noticed immediately and filed away. Gareth, he was now at the far side of the table, 1 seat farther from his father, creating just enough physical distance to suggest a conversation had happened in that room that had not been entirely cordial. Diane Cole was on a phone call that she ended as they entered, with the decisive button press of someone closing one conversation before opening another. One of the analysts had left. Richard Hawthorne was in the same chair, in the same position, his hands flat on the table in front of him, like a man who had decided something and settled into it. "Mr. Carter," Hawthorne said, "please sit." Ethan sat. Lily sat beside him, pulling Gerald from her backpack and setting him in her lap with the quiet efficiency of a child who had her systems and stuck to them. Hawthorne looked at Gerald for exactly 1 second. Something in his expression moved so briefly and so subtly that Ethan wasn't certain he'd seen it before, settling back into its resting state of measured authority. "I want to be direct with you," Hawthorne said. "Please," Ethan said. "The financials are strong. Your platform has legitimate competitive moat. The team metrics your presentation included were some of the best employee retention figures I've seen at this growth stage, which tells me something about how you operate internally." He folded his hands. "My family has been in this business for a very long time, Mr. Carter. I have put money behind hundreds of companies, and I can tell you with genuine conviction that the numbers you've brought us today are the kind of numbers we see maybe once or twice in a decade." Ethan said nothing. He waited. "However," Hawthorne said. There it was. The word that lived at the center of every conversation like this, the hinge that everything else swung on. "My partners have raised some concerns, not about the business." He paused. "About the leadership profile. About what we might call, and I want to be careful with how I phrase this, about the long-term sustainability of a solo operator who also carries significant family responsibilities." Ethan's jaw tightened, one small movement controlled instantly. "We've had situations in the past," Hawthorne continued, "where a founder with external pressures, whatever the nature of those pressures, has found the demands of a high-growth company at this stage to be—" he searched for a word, "difficult to balance." "Every founder has external pressures," Ethan said. "Every single one. The question is what they do with them." "Fair," Hawthorne said. He looked at Ethan steadily. "But I'll be honest, and I'll say what others in this room have been dancing around." He didn't look at Gareth when he said it, but the angle of his not looking said something. Bringing a child to this meeting was it raised questions about judgment, about the line between professional and personal. I want to give you the chance to address that directly. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He looked at Richard Hawthorne, at this man who had built and inherited an empire, and who sat at the head of tables in glass towers and made decisions that moved money, like weather systems move air. And he thought about what this man had probably never had to do. He'd probably never packed a lunch at 5:45 in the morning because a school had called about a burst pipe and every sitter was unavailable, and the most important meeting of his career was in 3 hours. He'd probably never read a bedtime story with his voice cracking because the child in the bed had his wife's eyes, and the grief was still a physical thing, still present, still arriving uninvited at inconvenient hours. He'd probably never written, "You're my favorite part of every day," on a folded note and tucked it into a lunchbox. Because love, at this kind of scale, the kind that has no backup plan, the kind with no safety net, the kind where you are the only person standing between a small human being and the worst of what the world can do, probably looked from a certain elevation like a complication. "Mr. Hawthorne," Ethan said, "I want to answer your question directly because you asked it directly, and I respect that." Hawthorne waited. "I brought my daughter to this meeting because the alternative was canceling it. I have been in business long enough to know that rescheduling a meeting at this level a third time is not rescheduling, it's withdrawing. So I made a decision, and I would make the same decision again." He let that sit, "But I want to address the broader thing you're really asking." He looked around the table at Gareth, who was staring at the surface of it, at Diane Cole, who was watching Ethan with an expression that had become genuinely hard to categorize, at the remaining analysts and junior partners, who were still and watchful. "You're asking whether the fact that I am also a father makes me a less reliable CEO. Whether having a child, specifically being a single parent, is a liability in the kind of leadership role this partnership would require." The room was completely still. "My answer," Ethan said, "is no, and I'll tell you why." He didn't open his folder. He didn't go back to his slides. He just looked at them. "Every decision I make, knowing that there is a 6-year-old girl who is watching me model what it means to be a person in the world. What it means to show up. What it means to handle pressure. What it means to fail and keep going. That is not a distraction from leadership. That is leadership. The kind that doesn't end at 5 o'clock. He paused. "My company has 340 employees. Many of them are parents. Some of them are single parents. The culture we've built is one where family is not a liability to be minimized. It's part of why people come to work and why they stay. Our retention numbers prove that. And if the question is whether I can run a high-growth company while also being present for my daughter, the answer is in the data you just spent 2 hours reviewing." No one spoke. "I didn't build a $47 million ARR platform in spite of being her father," Ethan said quietly. "I built it because of it." Richard Hawthorne was looking at him with that complex, unreadable expression again, the one with too many layers to parse quickly, like a contract written in a language you almost speak, but not quite. Then Gareth Hawthorne did something that Ethan had not expected. He leaned forward. "That's a very good speech," he said, and the friendly blade quality was back a little sharper now, a little less interested in pretending. "It's also exactly the kind of thing a founder says when he wants to make a room feel bad for asking a legitimate question." Ethan looked at him. "I'm not making this room feel anything," he said. "I'm answering the question you asked." "The question wasn't about your parenting," Gareth said. "Nobody is questioning your parenting. The question is about your bandwidth. This deal, if we move forward, requires a CEO who can be in Singapore in 48 hours if the market moves, who can be on a plane to Frankfurt for a regulatory hearing, who can spend 3 weeks doing a roadshow in Q2 without Mr. Carter having to call a babysitter first." There it was. Finally. No more careful phrasing. No more bandwidth and external pressures and complications. Without having to call a babysitter first. Ethan looked at Gareth Hawthorne. He looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the silence got uncomfortable. Long enough that Diane Cole shifted in her seat, long enough that even Richard Hawthorne seemed to recalibrate something behind his eyes. "My daughter has a name," Ethan said. The quiet changed quality. Her name is Lily. She is 6 years old. She lost her mother 3 years ago. And she has never, not once, prevented me from doing what needed to be done for my company. His voice was level. Absolutely level. The way very controlled things are level. You want to know if I can get on a plane to Singapore in 48 hours? I can. You want to know if I can do a 3-week road show? I can. You want to know how? Because I have a support structure. I have spent 3 years building specifically so that I never have to choose between my company and my daughter's well-being. He paused. I built that support structure the same way I built my company, through planning, through relationships, and through refusing to treat any challenge as something that couldn't be solved. Gareth opened his mouth. The difference, Ethan said, and something in his voice went very quiet, the way things go quiet before they go still, is that my daughter will never in her entire life feel like a problem. Not for me. Not for anyone. He looked at Gareth directly. And if the environment this partnership creates is one where she is discussed as a variable to be managed, as a logistical issue, as a liability, as something to be minimized and worked around, then I need to be honest with you. He placed his hands flat on the table. I'm not sure we're the right fit. The room was absolutely silent. Somewhere outside the glass tower, 38 floors down, the city was moving, traffic and voices, and the 10,000 unremarkable sounds of ordinary life. Up here in this room, with its old wood and its expensive air, and its people who had controlled billions and had never once been told that a child was not a complication, up here, nothing moved at all. Richard Hawthorne looked at his son. Gareth looked at the table. Diane Cole looked at Ethan with an expression that was, for the first time all morning, completely unguarded. It lasted only a second. Then she put her professional face back on and picked up her pen and looked at the pad in front of her. But Ethan had seen the second. He filed it away. Richard Hawthorne cleared his throat. I think, he said carefully, we should take another look at the term sheet. There are a few structural elements my team would like to revisit before we move to signature. It was on its face a procedural statement, a pivot to logistics. The kind of sentence that ends a difficult moment by redirecting traffic toward familiar ground. But Ethan heard something else in it. He had been in enough rooms to know that sometimes a powerful man's way of saying you've made your point is to stop making the other one. Of course, Ethan said. Preston will bring in the revised documents within the hour. I'll be here. Hawthorne nodded. He pushed his chair back, not to leave, just to signal a recess. A breath, a door opening and closing, and said something quiet to Gareth, who nodded without looking up. Ethan turned to Lily. She was watching him with those dark, steady eyes. She'd stopped coloring. She hadn't been coloring for a while. He realized had probably stopped when the conversation shifted into territory. Even her 6-year-old antenna could feel. You did good, she whispered. He looked at his daughter. This small person in her blue dress, with the white flowers, with the one-eyed rabbit named Gerald, and the shoebox of notes under her bed, and the dream she sometimes had about an empty kitchen, and a voice that called, and he felt something in his chest that was not quite pride and not quite grief, and was probably some third thing that didn't have a clean name yet. So did you, he said. She went back to her wail. The room began to move again. Papers, shuffling a phone call, placed quiet conversations in the corners, and Ethan Carter sat in the middle of it and let himself feel for one private, unwitnessed moment the full weight of everything that had just happened. Then he straightened, opened his folder, uncapped his pen, and waited. Preston returned 51 minutes later. Not the promised hour. 51 minutes, which Ethan noted because he noticed things like that, the small gap between what powerful people said they would do and what they actually did. The fraction of time they shaved off or added without explanation. The minor adjustments that communicated without words that they were the ones controlling the clock. He carried a folder. Thick blue, the Hawthorne Group logo, embossed on the cover in the particular shade of gold that money uses when it wants to announce itself without appearing to try. He set it in front of Ethan with the careful deference of a man who understood that the object he was delivering was significant, even if he himself was not. The revised term sheet, Preston said. Mr. Hawthorne Sr. has incorporated some structural adjustments. He'd like you to review Section 4 in particular. The governance provisions have been amended. Thank you, Ethan said. Preston nodded and left the room. The double doors swung shut behind him with the soft, heavy click of something expensive closing. The room was quieter now. Two of the analysts had not returned from the break. Diane Cole was at the far end of the table with a laptop open, doing something that was either deeply urgent or deliberately pointed. The kind of focused industry that signals to a room that one person has decided the most important thing happening right now is whatever is on their screen. Gareth was talking quietly on his phone near the windows, turned away, one hand in his pocket. The posture of a man conducting a conversation he didn't want overheard. Richard Hawthorne sat at the head of the table. He was watching Ethan. Not in an aggressive way. Not in the assessing, measuring way from earlier in the morning. Something quieter than that. Something that Ethan couldn't immediately name and didn't entirely trust, because in his experience, when powerful men got quiet and watchful, it usually meant something was being decided that hadn't been announced yet. Ethan opened the folder. He read carefully. He always read carefully. It was one of the things his first mentor, a sharp, impatient woman named Gloria Chen, who'd run a mid-sized tech firm out of Chicago, had beaten into him in his mid-20s. Read every word she used to say. Not most of the words. Not the important-looking words. Every single word. The ones that will hurt you are never in the headings. The standard provisions were unchanged. Equity stake, board composition, anti-dilution rights. He moved through them methodically, checking each against the version he'd already reviewed and the mental checklist he'd been carrying for 6 weeks. Then he reached Section 4. He read it once. Then he read it again more slowly, the way you read something when you're hoping the second pass will change what the first pass told you. It didn't. He set the folder down on the table and looked up. Richard Hawthorne was still watching him. "You found it," Hawthorne said. It wasn't a question. "The relocation provision," Ethan said. Hawthorne nodded. "Standard for partnerships at this level of international scope. Our portfolio CEOs with global operations are expected to be headquartered in one of 3 cities, New York, London, or Singapore, within 18 months of the deal closing. It gives us the kind of access and time zone alignment that makes oversight practical." Ethan looked at the language on the page. CEO shall establish primary residence within one of the designated global hubs as outlined in Schedule C, within 18 months of the effective date as a condition of continued partnership. Lily was sitting beside him, quietly recoloring a section of the whale she'd apparently decided wasn't quite right. She'd switched from the midnight blue to a slightly darker shade. The kind of perfectionism that came from nowhere and would probably never leave. She didn't know what was in the folder. She was 6. She was coloring a whale. But Ethan looked at her, and then he looked at the page, and he did the math that the page was asking him to do. New York, possibly. They could manage New York. But London, Singapore. Uprooting a 6-year-old girl who had already lost her mother, who had just settled into a school she loved, who had a shoebox of notes under her bed, and a neighbor 4 houses down, who made her hot chocolate and called her Mija, and who represented the only functional village that Ethan had managed to build around his daughter in 3 years of building things alone. He closed the folder. "This wasn't in the original term sheet," he said. "No," Hawthorne said. "It's a new condition." "Why new?" Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. He folded his hands on the table in that same settled way from before, the posture of a man who had decided. "Frankly, Mr. Carter, because what we observed this morning raised questions about operational agility. Our concern, and I want to be honest with you about this, because I think you deserve honesty. Our concern is that your current living situation creates geographic constraints that could limit your effectiveness in a global role." Ethan heard it. Heard all of it. Every word. Your current living situation, meaning your daughter. Meaning the fact that you are a single father with no co-parent, and a 6-year-old who has roots and a life and a village that cannot be simply packed into a shipping container and moved to Singapore because a term sheet requires it. He said nothing for a moment. And in that moment of silence, Gareth Hawthorne ended his phone call and came back to the table. "Did he find the relocation clause?" he said to his father, pulling out his chair. "He did," Hawthorne said. Gareth sat. He looked at Ethan with an expression that was Ethan thought the most honest thing Gareth had shown him all morning. Not hostility exactly. Something more like the calm certainty of a man who had already decided how this ended, and was simply waiting for the other party to arrive at the same conclusion. "Look," Gareth said, and for the first time his voice had dropped the performed warmth entirely, and was just direct, not unkind, not cruel, simply direct. The voice of a man who believed he was saving everyone time. "I'm going to say what I think because I think we've been dancing around it long enough." "Go ahead," Ethan said. "You're talented, genuinely. The platform is real, the numbers are real, the vision is real. In another version of your life, 5 years ago maybe, or 5 years from now, this is the easiest yes we've given in a decade." He glanced at Lily briefly, and the glance was not malicious, not anymore, just acknowledging. "But right now today, you have obligations that are fundamentally incompatible with what we need from a CEO at this stage of growth. That's not a judgment of you as a father, it's just arithmetic." "Arithmetic," Ethan repeated. "Global expansion requires global presence. Our other portfolio companies at this level, their CEOs are on planes twice a week. They're in 7 time zones in a single month. They are essentially citizens of the deal until the company stabilizes, which at this growth rate is probably 3 to 4 years out." He leaned forward slightly. "You have a 6-year-old daughter, who as we can see needs you present. And the arithmetic of those two things doesn't work out." The room was quiet. Ethan looked at Gareth Hawthorne for a long time. He thought about what Claire would say if she were sitting next to him right now, instead of in the ground in a cemetery, 20 minutes from their house, under a headstone that Lily sometimes brought drawings to on Saturday mornings. Claire, who had been a 3rd-grade teacher and had once reduced a school board member to actual tears in a public meeting by simply refusing to stop making sense. Claire, who used to say that the people most confident in their arithmetic were usually the ones who had decided in advance what the answer was going to be. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. Gareth gestured with one hand. "Go ahead." "Your portfolio CEO in APAC, the one running the logistics platform you acquired in 2021. What's his name?" Gareth blinked. "Harrison." "Harrison. Does Harrison have children?" A pause. "I believe so, yes." "How many?" 2, maybe 3. And his wife manages the household. The school pickups, the sick days, the emergency situations that arise when a child's school has a plumbing failure and every babysitter is unavailable, and the most important meeting of your career is in 3 hours. Gareth's expression shifted. Just slightly. "Because the arithmetic you're describing," Ethan said, "works perfectly when there are 2 adults and one of them has quietly agreed to be the load-bearing wall of the family, while the other one gets to be the ceiling that everyone sees. I don't have that. I have never had that, and I have still built what I built." He opened his folder again, turned to the retention metrics page, and turned it to face Gareth on the table. "Explain to me using the arithmetic you're so confident in how these numbers were produced by a man who doesn't have the bandwidth for the job." Gareth looked at the page. He didn't say anything, and Ethan did something then that he hadn't planned. He picked up his own pen, turned the revised term sheet to section 4, and drew a single clean line through the relocation provision. The sound of the pen on the page was very quiet, but everyone in the room heard it. Gareth stared at it. "You can't just—" "It's a negotiation," Ethan said. "I'm negotiating." Richard Hawthorne made a sound. It might have been a cough. It might have been something else. Ethan looked at him directly. "Mr. Hawthorne, you've been in this business for a very long time, longer than I've been alive. And in that time you've funded hundreds of companies. You said that yourself." He held the older man's gaze. "In your experience, genuinely, in your honest experience, has the CEO who ran the best company always been the one who had the fewest personal obligations? Or has it been the one who understood better than anyone else in the room what they were building and why?" Hawthorne was quiet. It was a different quality of quiet than everything that had come before it. Not strategic quiet. Not the quiet of a man waiting for the right moment to speak. Something more interior than that, something that suggested the question had landed somewhere real. "The why matters," Ethan said. He wasn't performing now. He wasn't presenting. He was just talking the way you talk when the prepared version of yourself has run out, and what's left is just the truth sitting there straightforward and exposed. I'll tell you my why. It's not complicated. It's sitting right here coloring a whale. Nobody looked at Lily. Everybody thought about her. I built this company because I had a daughter who needed a father who hadn't given up. Because after her mother died, I had two choices. I could contract, reduce myself to something small enough to not risk failing again, or I could build something. Prove that loss wasn't the last word. His voice was steady. Every decision I have made for 3 years, I have made with the knowledge that she's watching. Every time I've had to choose between the easy thing and the right thing. She's been the reason I chose right. You want to call that a complication? I call it the most clarifying force I have ever had in my professional life. Diane Cole had closed her laptop. She was watching him now with both hands on the table, her reading glasses off, her full attention given freely, and without the professional distance that had characterized her all morning. Gareth was looking at the line through Section 4. Richard Hawthorne said slowly, "The relocation provision is standard practice, Mr. Carter. I'm not certain it's something we can simply remove." "I'm not asking you to remove it permanently," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to defer it. 2 years. Give me 2 years to demonstrate operationally what I've already demonstrated in the data. If after 2 years you want to revisit the geography conversation, we revisit it. But make the decision based on performance, not on assumptions about what a single father can and cannot do." Hawthorne looked at his son. Gareth's expression was complicated. The expression of a man who had come into a room planning to win a specific argument and was now realizing the argument had moved to ground he hadn't prepared for. "That would require amendment to the standard agreement," Gareth said. "Our legal team would need to review." "Your legal team is down the hall," Ethan said, "and I have time." The silence stretched. And then Richard Hawthorne did something that shifted the room. He uncapped his own pen. He picked up the term sheet. He turned to Section 4, and he drew a bracket around the relocation provision, not a line through it. A bracket, the marking of a man who was not agreeing but was not refusing, who was placing something in suspension, holding it open, neither killing it nor committing to it. "My legal team will review it," he said. Gareth stared at his father. Hawthorne did not look at his son. "In the meantime," he said, "let's address the remaining provisions. Section 7. The performance benchmarks. I have some questions about the timeline on the international revenue targets." And just like that, they were back in the room, back in the negotiation, back in the place where numbers and structures and legal language did the work that arguments couldn't. Ethan exhaled. Not visibly, he'd had too many years of practice for visible exhales in negotiating rooms, but internally, the long, slow exhale of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has been permitted for just one moment to set it down. He uncapped his pen. They worked for another 90 minutes. By the time they reached Section 12, Lily was asleep. Ethan noticed it in his peripheral vision. Her head had dropped to one side. Her coloring book still open in front of her. The whale now almost entirely finished a small landscape of blues and greens, and one experimental patch of purple near the tail that she'd tried, and then tried to correct, but left because sometimes a thing has already happened, and you work with it. Gerald was tucked under her arm. Her breathing was slow and even. She had been awake since before 6. She had sat in a room full of tension and performed neutrality and careful cruelty for most of the morning. She had picked up her pencil case without complaint and climbed back into her chair and gone back to her whale. And she had done it without once asking to leave, without once asking when they were going home, without once making any of this harder than it already was. And now she was asleep. Ethan looked at her for 1 second longer than was strictly necessary, then returned his eyes to the document in front of him. Richard Hawthorne noticed. His gaze moved from Ethan to Lily and back, and the complex expression was back, that layered interior thing that Ethan had been trying to read all morning and hadn't quite cracked. "She's been remarkably patient," Hawthorne said, quietly, not to the room, to Ethan specifically. "She usually is," Ethan said. "How old? 6? Hawthorne was quiet. Then, My youngest was 6 when I closed my first major deal. 1987. I was in Tokyo for 3 weeks. A pause. I missed her school play. She was a sunflower. Another pause. She told me about it when I got home, standing in the kitchen in her costume. She'd kept it on all day waiting for me. She thought if she was still in costume when I got home, it would be like I'd been there. Ethan said nothing. The story sat between them, quiet and complete. Her name is Margaret, Hawthorne said. She's 35 now. She lives in Portland. She has 2 kids of her own. He looked at Lily again. She doesn't talk to me much. Ethan looked at Richard Hawthorne, really looked at him the way he hadn't been able to. All morning, past the authority and the wealth and the managed distance of a man who had spent decades building walls out of competence, and saw something he hadn't expected. He saw the arithmetic working out. Not the arithmetic Gareth had described, not the clean, indifferent math of bandwidth and time zones and operational agility. The other arithmetic. The harder kind. The kind that takes 30 years to complete and delivers its answer when you're 60-something and your daughter lives in Portland and keeps the conversations short. Mr. Hawthorne, Ethan said carefully. The older man seemed to collect himself, returned from wherever he'd briefly been. Forgive me, I digress. He picked up his pen. Section 12. Section 12. Ethan agreed. But something had changed. Not in the document. The language on the page was what it was, and the numbers were what they were, and the provisions and the benchmarks and the governance structure were all still sitting there, waiting to be agreed upon, or disputed, or amended. Something in the room. In the specific way that Hawthorne was now holding his pen, and the specific angle at which he was reading the page, and the almost imperceptible loosening around the set of his jaw. The afternoon light had moved while they were working. The quality of the light through the windows was different now, later the particular gold of a sun that has done most of its day's traveling. Ethan's coffee from the morning service had gone cold 2 hours ago. He hadn't touched it since the break. Section 12. Performance benchmarks. International revenue targets. The specifics of what they were asking him to do, and when they were asking him to do it, and what happened if he fell short. He read it. He pushed back on 2 items. Hawthorne pushed back on one of his pushbacks. They compromised on the other. Gareth, who had been quiet since the relocation clause moment, made 2 precise technical observations about the penalty structure in subsection 12C that were genuinely well-reasoned, and that Ethan acknowledged directly. That's a fair point. Let's adjust the language, because one of the things Gloria Chin had also taught him was that the best negotiators won by being willing to be right about specific things, rather than by defending every position they'd taken. You're not there to win the argument, she'd said. You're there to get the deal. Those are different things. They were getting close to the deal. Ethan could feel it. The way he always could in the final stage of a negotiation, the room's energy-changing quality, becoming less combative and more collaborative. The shift from what are we fighting over to how do we close this? The feeling of gravity pulling everything toward a single point. A contract, a signature, $950 million and everything that came with it. He thought about what that would mean. Not in the abstract boardroom way, not in slides and projections and market penetration rates. In the specific, concrete, physical way. What it would mean for Marcus, who had been working 65-hour weeks for 2 years on the salary of someone who should have been making twice that. What it would mean for the engineering team, who had been carrying a product roadmap on sheer momentum and belief, because the budget for the things they needed kept getting deferred. What it would mean for the Dallas client and the 46 others like them, who were depending on a platform that needed to grow in order to keep delivering what it was promising. What it would mean for Lily that was harder to think about in the specific, concrete, physical way, because what she needed from him wasn't something that could be funded. But stability could be funded. Security could be funded. The ability to stop carrying the low-grade financial anxiety that he'd been carrying for 3 years, and that he told himself she couldn't detect, but that children always detect, because they are antennae for exactly the things adults most want to hide. He turned to the signature page. Preston had placed 2 copies on the table at some point in the last hour. Ethan had seen him come and go, a quiet professional ghost. 2 copies side by side, the final stage made physical, The whole long morning arrived at its conclusion. Ethan looked at the signature line. He looked at Lily. She was still asleep. Her head tilted at the gentle angle of someone sleeping in a chair, completely trusting in the way that deeply asleep children are trusting, giving everything over, no guardedness left. Just the pure animal fact of rest. Gerald was still under her arm. He picked up his pen. And Gareth Hawthorne said, "Before you sign, I want to say something." Ethan looked up. Gareth had both hands flat on the table. He was looking at Ethan with the directness of a man who has made a private decision about something and is committed to acting on it regardless of how it lands. "I want to apologize," Gareth said. The room did something, a collective micro-shift, the almost invisible movement of people recalibrating, for the comment this morning about the babysitter. He didn't look away. It was dismissive. It wasn't appropriate. And it wasn't. He paused, and the pause cost him something. Ethan could see it, the small price of the words that came next. It wasn't fair to her. He didn't look at Lily. He looked at Ethan. Or to you. Ethan held the pen. He looked at Gareth Hawthorne, this man who had weaponized his charm and his confidence, and his old money certainty. All morning, who had used the word complications like a scalpel, who had described a 6-year-old as arithmetic, and he saw what was there now under the apology. Not contrition exactly, not the soft emotive kind. Something harder and more honest, the recognition of a man who had looked at himself from a specific angle and not entirely liked what he'd seen. "Thank you," Ethan said. It was simple, not warm, not cold. It acknowledged the apology without performing acceptance of it. Gareth nodded. He picked up his own copy of the contract and looked at the signature page. And then Richard Hawthorne said quietly from the head of the table, "There's one more item." Ethan looked at him. "Section 4, Hawthorne said. The relocation provision." He had the bracketed page open in front of him. He looked at it for a moment, the kind of look you give a decision right before you make it, checking it one last time. Then he picked up his pen. "I'm amending it. Relocation is deferred at CEO's discretion pending performance review at the 24-month mark. Your legal team can confirm the language, but that's the intent." Gareth looked at his father. Something moved across his face. Surprise, and then something beneath the surprise that might have been relief. "Thank you," Ethan said again. This time it was warmer. Hawthorne made a small dismissive gesture with his hand, the gesture of a man waving away. Thanks for something he's not entirely willing to examine too closely in public. They moved to sign. First, the financial provisions. Then, the governance structure. Then, the international expansion terms, and the performance benchmarks, and the anti-dilution rights, and the board composition. Page by page, section by section, the thing that had existed only as potential all morning was becoming real. Ethan was 3 pages from the end when Lily woke up. She woke up the same way she always did, completely all at once. Her head came up, her eyes opened, and for a single disoriented second, she looked around the room, the way people do when they've woken in an unfamiliar place, locating themselves, taking inventory. She found Ethan. Her expression settled. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She looked at the papers on the table, at the pen in his hand, at the room full of people watching her with expressions ranging from professional neutrality to something considerably warmer. "Are you signing it?" she asked. "Almost," he said. She sat up straighter and pulled Gerald more firmly under her arm. "Okay," she said with the solemnity of someone officiating. And almost against their will, almost as one, the people in the room smiled. Not the amused smiles from the morning. Not the sharp or performative smiles of people managing impressions. Real smiles, the kind that happen before your professional face has time to intercept them. Even Gareth. Even Diane Cole, who had been the most carefully guarded person in the room all morning, who smiled with the slightly surprised expression of someone who had not given themselves permission to, and had done it anyway. Richard Hawthorne smiled last and deepest, and then looked at the window with the expression of a man who has just encountered something he wasn't expecting to encounter in a building like this one. Ethan turned back to the contract. 2 more pages. He signed them. Hawthorne signed his copies. Gareth signed. Preston materialized at some point to collect the documents as junior associates do at the completion of things appearing from nowhere, performing the final necessary logistics with the smooth efficiency of a man who understands his role in the machinery. And then it was done. $950 million. Signed, witnessed, and real. Ethan sat for a moment with his pen capped in his hand, looking at the closed folder in front of him. I thought he would feel something definitive. Relief, maybe. Triumph. The clean, bright feeling of a thing completed after a long effort. He'd felt that before, after the first big client, after the first product launch, after the quarterly earnings call that had been the first one he hadn't been secretly afraid of. What he actually felt was more complicated than any of those things. It was layered and mixed and didn't have a clean shape. Lily put her hand on his arm. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. You did it." He looked at her. At this 6-year-old person in her blue dress with the white flowers who had woken up this morning to a canceled school day and a father with a mountain to climb and had simply said without drama, "I can do that, Dad." "We did it," he said. She considered this with appropriate seriousness, then nodded. "We did it," she agreed. Richard Hawthorne was watching them. I was watching them with the expression of a man who has been handed something he didn't realize he was reaching for. Unexpected, slightly off balance, the expression of someone standing in a room that has just shown him something he won't easily forget. He stood, buttoned his jacket, extended his hand to Ethan. "Welcome to the family," he said, and there was something in the word family, the way it arrived in the sentence, the way it sat in the room, the way Hawthorne said it with only slightly more weight than necessary, like a man leaving a door open that he'd kept closed for a very long time, that made Ethan wonder for just a moment what exactly had been signed in that room today. The contract, yes, but also something else, something that didn't have language yet and might not need it. He shook Hawthorne's hand. "Thank you," he said. He reached down and picked up Lily's backpack. She climbed out of her chair and took his hand and tucked Gerald under her other arm, and they walked toward the double doors. Gareth was standing near the doors. As Ethan reached him, Gareth put out his hand. Ethan looked at it, then shook it. "I meant what I said," Gareth said. "The apology." "I know," Ethan said. "I've been in this business a long time," Gareth said. "I think I've learned some of the wrong things from it." It was the most honest thing he'd said all day. Maybe Ethan thought in a long time. "You can unlearn them," Ethan said. Gareth looked at Lily, who was looking back at him with those clear dark eyes. "Hi," she said. "A beat." "Hi," Gareth said. "I like your tie," she told him. His mouth opened, closed, opened. He looked like a man whose fencing opponent had just put down the sword and offered him a cookie. "Thank you," he said finally. "It's Italian." She nodded as if this was useful information, and then looked up at her father, and they walked out through the double doors, down the hall, into the elevator, through the lobby and out through the glass doors, into the afternoon air, the open, ordinary, unhurried air of a city going about its business. 38 floors below, where history had just been made in a quiet room with old wood and expensive lighting. Lily tilted her face up toward the sky. "It's still sunny," she said with the satisfaction of someone whose specific prediction had come true. "It is," Ethan said. She swung his hand once, twice. "Can we get ice cream?" He looked at his daughter, at this person who had just sat through the most consequential morning of his professional life, with the patience of someone 4 times her age, who had colored a whale and fallen asleep in a boardroom chair and woken up to tell him he'd done it, who had looked a man in a $300 Italian tie in the eye and told him she liked it, who kept her father's notes in a shoebox, and still had the dream sometimes, and still reached for Gerald in the dark. "Yeah," he said. "We can get ice cream." She broke into a grin, the full, unguarded grin of a child who has been very patient for a very long time and has now received her just reward. They walked toward the car together, her hand in his in the afternoon sun. And somewhere behind them, 38 floors up in a room with long dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows. Richard Hawthorne stood at the glass and watched them cross the parking lot, and his expression was the expression of a man looking at something he recognized too late, and the name of what he recognized was time, and what he understood. Standing there was, that time was the one thing no amount of $950 million deals had ever been able to give back. He stood there for a long moment. Then he turned away from the window, walked back to the table, and picked up the signed contract. The afternoon light was changing. The day was still going. But something in that room was already over. And something else, something that Ethan Carter was carrying down to his car in the parking lot 38 floors below in the form of a 6-year-old girl with a one-eyed rabbit and ice cream on her mind, had already begun. They got chocolate, both of them. Lily had asked for sprinkles, and then changed her mind, and asked for hot fudge, and then changed her mind again, and settled on both with the decisive finality of someone who has earned the right to want everything. Ethan got a single scoop of dark chocolate in a cup, and they sat in the car in the parking lot of the ice cream place, 3 blocks from the glass tower, because Lily had declared she was too hungry to wait until they got home, and he had not argued. She ate with both hands on the cone, focused and serious about it. He sat with his cup in his lap and didn't eat for a while. Just sat. The afternoon was doing the thing. Afternoons do in late October, going golden at the edges. The light thickening, the shadows getting long before you noticed they'd started moving. He watched a couple walk past the car with a stroller, the woman saying something that made the man laugh, and the man putting his hand on the small of her back without thinking about it. The automatic intimacy of people who have been together long enough to touch without deciding to. Ethan looked away. "Dad," Lily said, chocolate on her chin. "Yeah. You're not eating your ice cream." He looked at the cup. The single scoop was beginning to lose its shape at the edges, the chocolate softening in the warmth of the car. He ate a spoonful. "Better," she said. "Better," he said. She went back to her cone, satisfied. She had a gift for identifying the problem and addressing it without ceremony. She'd had it since she was very small, before the loss, before any of this. Back when the 3 of them were still a triangle, and Claire used to call Lily their little fixer, because even at 3 years old, she would notice when someone in the room was unhappy and walk over and place her hand on them. Just her hand, just the fact of contact, as if that alone might be enough. It usually was. Ethan ate his ice cream. Outside the car, the afternoon continued doing what afternoons do, indifferent to the $950 million that had just changed hands. 38 floors above this parking lot, indifferent to the conversation about babysitters and bandwidth and complications, indifferent to the relocation clause, and the apology, and the old man at the window watching them walk away. Just a Tuesday. Just light and cold air. And a man and his daughter eating ice cream in a car. "Dad?" Lily said again. "Yeah." The man with the Italian tie. She licked a drip of fudge from the side of her cone. "Do you think he's nice?" Ethan considered this. Considered how to answer it honestly to a 6-year-old, without performing either more generosity than he felt, or more bitterness than was warranted. "I think he's trying to be," he said finally. She considered this with appropriate seriousness, in the way she considered things that mattered. "Mom used to say that counts for something." He stopped. It was the way she did it, not dramatically, not with warning, just worked Claire into the conversation, the way she'd always been there. The way the dead persist in the mouths of the people who loved them, arriving without announcement and leaving the same way. "She did," he said. His voice was steady. He'd had 3 years of practice at steady. "I think she would have liked the whale," Lily said. He looked at her. "What whale?" "The one I colored. She liked blue things." She finished the last of her cone, bit off the tip, with the satisfaction of someone completing a job. She had that blue bowl she always made popcorn in. "Remember?" "I remember," he said. "The blue bowl." He still had it. It was in the cabinet above the stove, and he never used it for popcorn because it didn't feel right, and he never moved it because that felt more wrong, and so it just sat there, a ceramic artifact of a life that had continued in many ways and stopped in one irreplaceable one. "I miss her," Lily said. Conversational. Not weighted, not broken, just the fact stated plainly the way she sometimes stated it, the same way she stated that it was still sunny, or that she wanted ice cream. Missing her mother was a condition of her life. She had grown around it the way trees grow around fences, not unmarked, but still growing. "Me too," Ethan said. She wiped her hands on a napkin from the glove box and looked out the window at the couple with the stroller who had moved down the block now and were almost out of sight. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. I think you should call Marcus." He almost laughed. "Why?" "Because he's probably really excited and doesn't know yet." She looked at him with Claire's eyes. "And because it's nice to tell people good things." He looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called Marcus. It rang once. "Talk to me," Marcus said. The voice of a man who had been waiting all day and was trying very hard to sound like he hadn't been. "It's done," Ethan said. A silence. Then, done as in signed. All 12 sections. The relocation clause is deferred, and the governance provisions are cleaner than the original draft. Another silence. Longer. The kind of silence that has a lot happening inside it. "Ethan." Marcus's voice had changed. "Man, we did," Ethan said. He heard something on the other end of the phone that might have been Marcus sitting down heavily in his chair, or standing up. Hard to tell. "I've been refreshing my email all day like a lunatic. You couldn't have texted me." "I was eating ice cream with my daughter." "That's okay. That's a completely valid reason. I accept that." A beat. "She okay?" "She's great," Ethan said. Lily, who could hear Marcus through the phone from 18 inches away, waved at the phone. "She says hi," Ethan said. "Hi, Lily," Marcus called. Then back to business, but a business that had completely changed temperature. Okay, so what do I need to do right now? What's the first thing?" "Tonight nothing," Ethan said. "Go home, have dinner, tell your wife. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I want the core leadership team in the conference room. Not a big announcement, not a company-wide thing, yet just the core team first." 9 o'clock, Marcus said. "Done. Ethan." "Yeah." "I knew it," Marcus said quietly. "I know I gave you the speech about contingency plans, and I know I sent you the analysis on postponement options and all of that, but—" A pause. "I knew." "I know you did," Ethan said. "See you tomorrow." He hung up. Lily had found a straw wrapper in the cup holder and was folding it into a very small accordion. Marcus was happy, she observed. Marcus was happy. Good. She held up the accordion. It was lopsided but structurally sound. She seemed satisfied with it. "Can we go home now?" "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home." He called Claire's mother that night after Lily was in bed. Helen Marsh lived 40 minutes north of them, in a house that smelled like lavender and old books. And she answered the phone on the second ring, the way she always had, with the particular alertness of a woman who had learned in the worst possible way that second rings should not be taken for granted. "Ethan." Her voice warm and a little worn, the voice of a woman who had carried a great deal and was still carrying it upright and graceful about it, in the way that people are graceful about things they have had no choice but to master. "Helen, I wanted to tell you the Hawthorne deal closed today." A sound on her end. The intake of breath that precedes something real. "Oh, sweetheart. $950 million, signed and done. Oh, Ethan." A pause, and he could hear her moving, the soft sound of her setting something down, giving the conversation her full attention. "She would be so proud of you. You know that." He sat at the kitchen counter in the quiet house, the blue bowl in its cabinet above the stove. Lily asleep down the hall with Gerald. The particular quiet of a house where a child is sleeping, a specific quality of quiet present, and living nothing like the quiet of a house where no one is. "I know," he said, and he did know. He kept it close, that knowledge, not as comfort exactly, because comfort required a softness that grief had permanently complicated, but as fact. As something real he could hold on to when the holding was necessary. "How's my girl?" Helen asked. "She was with you today." "She was. School was closed. I didn't have another option." "How did she do?" "Helen." He smiled, small and private, looking at the dark window over the sink. "She colored a whale. She fell asleep in the conference room chair. She woke up and told me I'd done it, and then she asked for ice cream. Helen made a sound that was half laugh and half something more complicated. That's her grandmother's temperament, she said. Claire's side, not mine. I know. You sound tired. I am. But okay. He thought about it. Really thought about it the way you can only do with people who have earned the right to the real answer. I think so, he said. Something happened today that I'm still processing. I'll tell you about it when I see you. Come Sunday, she said. Bring Lily. I'll make the soup she likes. We'll be there. Ethan. Her voice shifted, became the particular voice she used when she was saying something she'd been carrying and had decided to set down. I want to tell you something. I've been meaning to for a while. Okay. When Claire died when I was in the worst of it those first months, I was so frightened for you. Not just grieving, you understand. Frightened. You had that baby, and that company, and nothing else. And I didn't know. I honestly didn't know if you were going to be able to... She paused. You know. I know, he said quietly. But you did. Her voice was steady. You did it, Ethan. Not just today. Every day. For 3 years, every single day you did it. A beat. She knew you would. I want you to know that. She told me maybe 6 months before she died when she was still well enough for real conversations. She told me she wasn't worried about you. She said Mom, Ethan always finds a way. And she was right. He sat in the quiet kitchen for a moment. The blue bowl above the stove. The notes in the shoebox under the bed. The whale in the coloring book, mostly midnight blue, with one experimental patch of purple near the tail that had been tried and left because sometimes a thing has already happened. Thank you, Helen, he said. Sunday, she said. Soup. Sunday, he agreed. Soup. The next morning, he was in the office at 7:15. He wanted the hour before anyone else arrived, the building quiet and slightly echoing the cleaners done, and the first shift of people not yet there, that specific early morning moment that offices have when they belong to nobody, and remind you of what they were before they became what they are. He sat at his desk. He looked at the city through the window, their building not as shiny as the Hawthorne Tower, but solid real. The building that 47 clients trusted, and 340 people came to every morning. He looked at the photo on his desk, him and Claire and Lily at the beach. Lily about 2, sitting on Claire's lap in the sand, both of them looking at something off to the left, while Ethan had the camera pointed at them, capturing the unposed moment, which was always the true one. He looked at it for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and started writing. Not emails, not yet, not the cascade of necessary communications that would start the second the doors opened and people began arriving. Something else. A document he'd been meaning to write for a long time, and had always deferred the way you defer the things that feel too big or too true for the normal workday. He called it Company Values What We Actually Mean. He wrote for 45 minutes. He wrote about what he believed about work and people and the relationship between them. He wrote about his father who had worked a factory floor for 22 years and coached Ethan's little league team on the weekends, and had once told him that you could tell everything about a man by how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. He wrote about Claire obliquely, without naming her, about what it meant to build something with the knowledge that time was not guaranteed, and that the only answer to that knowledge was to make the thing real while you had the chance. He wrote about Lily. He wrote, "A company is not a family. I want to be clear about that. Confusing the two is how you end up with guilt-based manipulation dressed up as culture. But a company is made of people who have families. And if we lose sight of that, if we ask our people to pretend that their lives outside these walls don't exist, or worse, that those lives are liabilities, we lose the very thing that makes us capable of building anything worth having." He reread it. He left it. He moved to his email. The first message was from Marcus, sent at 11:47, the night before Team is on for 9 a.m. Also, I may have accidentally told my wife everything, and she cried. And I'm not saying I cried, but I'm not saying I didn't. See you tomorrow. The second was from Diane Cole. He stopped. He hadn't expected to hear from her. He hadn't thought about her particularly since leaving the Hawthorne building. She'd been present throughout, watchful and careful, the most professionally masked person in the room. And her final expression, the unguarded smile she hadn't given herself permission for, had registered and been filed, but not as something he anticipated following up with. The email was brief. Mr. Carter, I don't usually do this. I've been in this industry for 22 years and I have a rule about keeping professional context professional. But I wanted to tell you outside of the official correspondence and term sheet language and everything that will come next. What you did in that room yesterday. Not the presentation, which was excellent, but the other thing. I've been thinking about it since I left the building. I have 3 children. My youngest is 8. I have made a lot of decisions in my career that I told myself were necessary, and that I have sometimes in the quiet reconsidered. I am not sure what I am trying to say exactly. Maybe just thank you for making it look possible. D. Cole. He read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on the desk and sat with it for a moment. I thought about what it meant that a woman who had spent 22 years in the rooms where money made its decisions was sitting somewhere at 11-something at night, writing him an email that she'd admitted she didn't usually write about, something she'd admitted she wasn't entirely sure how to articulate. He thought about Hawthorne at the window. I thought about Gareth and the Italian tie, and I think I've learned some of the wrong things from it. He thought about the shoebox under Lily's bed, about the soup on Sunday, about Marcus, who may or may not have cried. He picked up his phone and wrote back, "Thank you for writing this. It means more than you know. And for what it's worth, it is possible. It's not easy. But nothing worth doing is." He sent it. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went to make a fresh pot of coffee before the team started arriving. The 9 o'clock meeting lasted 2 hours. He told them what had happened. The real version, not the curated version, not the highlights reel, but the actual sequence of events from the school closure at 8:03 to the signed contract at whatever time the afternoon had become. He told them about Lily. He told them about the babysitter comment. He told them about the relocation clause and drawing a line through it with his pen, and what Hawthorne had said, and what Gareth had said, and the amended provision, and the signature page, and the ice cream afterward. He told them all of it because they had earned all of it. These people who had stayed when the equity was hypothetical, and the runway was theoretical, and the whole thing was held together by his conviction and their willingness to share it. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then his head of engineering, a dry, precise man named Owen, who had a gift for complex systems and almost no patience for sentiment, said, "You drew a line through it." "I drew a line through it," Ethan said. Owen looked at the table, then back at Ethan. "That's the most unhinged thing I've ever heard you do." "Yeah. I love it," Owen said. The room laughed. Not the restrained, performative laughter of people in a boardroom. The real laughter of people who had been holding something for a long time and were now allowed to put it down. His head of product, Rosa, who had been with the company since the beginning, since the Craigslist server, and the first client call, and the 3-person team working out of a converted garage, was crying. Not dramatically. Quietly, the way she cried when things hit her sideways, wiping the corner of her eye with her knuckle, in the brisk, slightly impatient way of someone who has decided they're allowed to feel something and would prefer to do it efficiently. "Rosa," Marcus said. "I'm fine," she said. "Don't." "I wasn't. Don't." She straightened, looked at Ethan directly. 3 years, she said. "Day 1 you told me you were going to build something that mattered. I didn't fully believe you. I thought you were just another guy with a pitch deck and a dream." She paused. "I should have believed you." "You stayed," he said. "That's believing me." She shook her head. "Staying is easier than believing. Staying is just inertia and the right salary and not having a better offer yet." A pause. "But after today, I actually believe you. There's a difference." He looked at her. At all of them, Marcus, Owen, Rosa, the 6 others around the table, who had each in their own way bet on something that could have not worked out. "This changes things," he said. "Operationally, structurally, in terms of what we're able to do in the next 18 months, it changes a lot. And I want to be honest with you about that. It means faster, it means bigger, it means pressure that we haven't had to carry before." He looked around the room. But I also want to be honest about what it doesn't change. He picked up the document he'd been writing at 7:15 and set it on the table. I wrote something this morning, before you all got here. It's not a policy document, and it's not a memo. It's just... He paused. It's just what I believe, about what we're doing and why, and what kind of place this is supposed to be. He looked at Owen. Print copies and give them out. I want people to read it. Not in a meeting where they feel like they're supposed to react a certain way. Just read it. Owen took the document, read the title, looked up. Company values what we actually mean. He nodded. Honest title. I'm trying, Ethan said. The meeting broke up slowly, the way meetings break up when the news has been good and people want to stay in the room with it for a little while. The natural reluctance to end something that is felt for the duration, like something more than a meeting. Marcus hung back when the others left. He sat across from Ethan in the now empty conference room and put both his forearms on the table and looked at his friend and employer. Talk to me, he said. For real, not the speech, not the CEO version. Ethan leaned back. He looked at the ceiling. I'm exhausted, he said. I know. I keep thinking about Hawthorne's daughter. Margaret, lives in Portland, doesn't talk to him much. He shook his head. He told me that yesterday in the middle of the negotiation, like something broke open for a second and then closed again. Marcus was quiet. I was sitting there at the head of the table, Ethan said, and he had everything. The name, the fund, the building, the conference room. And he's telling me his daughter kept her sunflower costume on all day, waiting for him to come home. He paused. And I thought that could be me. In 25 years, if I'm not careful, that could be exactly me. It won't be, Marcus said. You don't know that. No, Marcus said. But you do. That's the difference between you and him. He didn't know to be afraid of it until it was done. You already know. You're already afraid of it. He looked at Ethan steadily. That's not a guarantee of anything, but it's not nothing. Ethan looked at the table. How do you do it? Marcus asked. Honestly, I've watched you for 3 years, and I've never quite... How do you hold all of it at the same time? The company Lily, everything you don't say out loud. Ethan thought about how to answer that. About all the things he could say that would be technically true, but incomplete about systems and planning and support structures, and the particular stubbornness that got confused with strength. About Gloria Chen and her rule about reading every word. About the 43 rooms. About the notes in the shoebox. I don't, he said. Not always. There are nights where she's had the dream, and I'm up at 2 in the morning, and I have a board call at 8, and the runway metrics are going to keep me up anyway, and I just sit in the kitchen, and I think I can't. I genuinely cannot do this. Marcus said nothing. Let him go. And then she pads down the hall, Ethan said, and she climbs in beside me, and she's out in 4 minutes, and I lie there watching the ceiling and thinking about her specifically. Her the exact specific, irreplaceable, particular person that she is, and something shifts. I don't know what to call it. It's not motivation exactly. It's more like, he paused, like being recalled. Like something pulling you back to what matters when you've started to lose the thread. He looked at Marcus. She's the thread, he said simply. She's been the thread since her mother died. And if I lose the thread, he stopped. I'm not going to lose the thread. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, she said you did it, huh? In the car. She said we did it. She corrected me, Ethan said. I said it first, and she said we. Marcus smiled. She's 6. She's 6, Ethan agreed. She's going to be terrifying when she's 30. She's already terrifying, Ethan said. She's just polite about it. Marcus laughed, a real one, the full version he usually kept. Under wraps, the laugh of a man who has been in the trenches long enough to appreciate a good moment when it finally arrives. 3 weeks later, the news was public. The announcement hit the business press on a Wednesday morning, a clean, factual headline, and a 3-paragraph statement from the Hawthorne Group that referenced the partnership in the measured language of institutional investing, which said very little and meant a great deal. What followed was not something Ethan had anticipated in its specific form, though in retrospect, he would understand why it happened. Someone in the room that day, He never found out who, and eventually stopped trying, had talked. Not maliciously, or not primarily maliciously. More the way things leak from rooms like that, the casual passage of a good story, through a network where good stories are the primary currency. You won't believe this, the CEO brought his 6-year-old daughter to a $950 million negotiation. That kind of thing. The story reached a journalist at a business outlet Ethan had been quoted in twice before. She reached out to Marcus for comment. Marcus, following protocol, declined and forwarded the inquiry to Ethan. Ethan read the inquiry. He thought about it for a day. He thought about what Claire would say. Just tell me the truth. I can handle the truth, and what Lily had said in the car. It's nice to tell people good things. He called the journalist back. He told her the full story. Not the negotiation details, those were private, and he kept them that way, but the morning. The school closure. The decision to bring Lily. The room. What had been said. What he had said back. The ice cream afterward. He told her clearly and honestly, and without performing either humility or triumph. The story published 4 days later. By the end of the week, it had been shared 200,000 times. I didn't read most of the coverage. He read some of the comments in the way you sometimes can't help reading comments. And what he found, there was not what he'd expected. Not the argument. Not the two sides digging in. Not the familiar binary of internet opinion. What he found was people. Just people telling their own versions of the same story. Men his age or older, who had been in rooms like that one, and had made the other choice, had canceled the meeting. Had sent the kid to a neighbor, had found a way to make the professional and the personal exist in completely separate rooms, with no door between them, and who wrote in the comment sections, and the replies, and the direct messages that began arriving in numbers that crashed his regular inbox inside of 48 hours. I wish I'd done what you did. I wish I'd known it was an option. Single parents, mostly mothers, but not only, who wrote with a specificity of feeling that suggested the story had hit something they'd been carrying alone, and were grateful for a moment not to carry alone. Fathers. A lot of fathers. Men who described themselves as 55, 60, 62, who had built things and run things and signed things, and who found in the story of a 32-year-old and his 6-year-old daughter in a boardroom on a Tuesday. Something they recognized, and something they missed, and something they were privately, quietly still trying to figure out how to fix. One message stopped him completely. It came from an email address. He didn't recognize a personal address, not a professional one. The message was 11 sentences long. My name is Margaret. I think you may have met my father recently. He called me after your meeting. He doesn't usually call, and when he does, we usually talk for about 4 minutes about nothing specific. This time we talked for 40. He told me about you and your daughter. He told me about the sunflower costume. He asked me if I remembered it. I told him I did. He said he was sorry. I don't know what you said to him in that room, but I wanted you to know that something happened because of it. Something that didn't have to happen, but did. Thank you. He read it 3 times. Then he set his phone down on the kitchen counter and stood very still for a moment in the kitchen with the blue bowl above the stove, while the house was quiet and Lily was asleep, and the evening was doing what evenings do. He picked the phone back up and wrote back, Margaret. Thank you for writing this. Your father told me about the costume. He told me in the middle of a business meeting about a lot of other things, and it was the most important thing said in the room all day. I hope the 40 minutes was the first of many. Ethan. He sent it. He stood in the kitchen. He thought about Hawthorne at the window 38 floors up, watching them cross the parking lot. He thought about the expression on the older man's face, that look of recognition too late of something that had already passed. He thought about Margaret in Portland with her 2 kids and her short phone calls and the sunflower costume she'd kept on all day. He thought about Lily. About Sunday at Helen's, the soup, she liked the lavender and old book smell of the house where her mother had grown up. About the shoebox and the notes and the whale with the purple patch near the tail. I went to the cabinet above the stove and took down the blue bowl. He held it in both hands for a moment. Just held it, the weight of it, the particular ceramic smoothness, the color that Claire had liked because she liked blue things. Then he opened the cabinet next to it and took out a bag of microwave popcorn. He put the popcorn in the microwave and put the blue bowl on the counter and waited for the popping to begin, that specific irregular cascading sound of small things becoming something else. When it was done, he poured the popcorn into the blue bowl. He took the bowl to the couch and sat down. He turned on the television, something quiet, something he didn't have to follow closely, and sat in the living room of the house where he and Claire had brought Lily home from the hospital, where they had put up the first Christmas tree, where the terrible and beautiful and ordinary business of their life together had been conducted for 6 years before it was conducted by one instead of two. He ate popcorn from the blue bowl, and for the first time in he didn't know how long he didn't feel the weight of the missing piece more than the weight of everything still there. Not because the missing piece was gone. It would never be gone. That wasn't how it worked. Gloria Chen and the grief counselor and Helen and everyone who had ever told him it gets easier were only partially right, because it didn't get easier exactly. It got different. It got something you learned to carry, rather than something that was always about to knock you down. But tonight. Tonight, something that had been tipped slightly back toward equilibrium. Like a table with one leg shorter than the others that you've finally learned to set on the right surface. Not fixed, but stable. He sat on this couch in the quiet house and ate popcorn from his dead wife's blue bowl and thought about all the things that had happened and all the things that were coming. And when the bowl was half empty, he covered it with plastic wrap and went to check on Lily. She was asleep. Gerald under her arm. Her breathing slow and even. On her nightstand, open to a finished page, was the coloring book. The whale was complete, the midnight blue body, the careful tail, the one experimental patch of purple that had been tried and left. Under the picture, in the slightly uncertain handwriting of someone who had recently learned to write, she had added words in purple crayon. He leaned down to read them. My Whale, by Lily Carter. She is brave. He straightened. He stood in the doorway of his daughter's room in the quiet house for a long moment, with the particular feeling you get when something small contains something enormous, when 6 words in purple crayon say something that 3 years of everything else have only been building toward. Then he pulled her door to its usual position, not closed, just nearly the way she preferred, and walked back down the hall. He had work in the morning, a company to run, a deal to honor. 340 people whose livelihoods were in part in his hands, a fact he never took lightly and never would. An 18-month plan to execute, and a board to satisfy, and a market to expand into, and all the daily relentless meaningful work of building something real. I had a daughter who would need breakfast in the morning, and a note in her lunchbox, and someone to drive her to school, and someone to pick her up, and someone to ask about her day, and someone to sit with her through the dream when it came. He had all of it. He had all of it, and it was too much, and it was exactly enough, and tomorrow it would start again. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. And in the morning, when the alarm went off at 5:30, he was already half awake, lying in the early dark, listening to the sounds of the house, his daughter still asleep down the hall. He got up. He went to the kitchen. He started the coffee. He got out the bread. He cut the crusts. He packed the apples. He wrote the note. You're my favorite part of every day. Dad. He folded it, tucked it into the corner of her lunchbox, clicked the lid. Outside the kitchen window. The early light was beginning to come up gray and slow over the neighbors' rooftops, the particular light of a morning that doesn't know yet what it's going to be. Ethan Carter stood in his kitchen with his coffee and watched it arrive. 2 years passed, the way years pass when you are building something, not slowly, not quickly, but fully. Every day used up and accounted for the kind of time that leaves marks. The Hawthorne partnership did what the numbers said it would. The international expansion moved into 4 markets in the first 14 months. The Singapore pilot, which Gareth had used as an example of the kind of travel that would require a CEO without complications, became their strongest performing market. By the end of year 1, managed as Ethan had promised, it would be through a combination of a strong regional director, a genuine support structure, and 3 trips that he had planned 6 weeks in advance each time, so that Lily knew with the certainty that children need exactly when he was leaving and exactly when he was coming back. He never missed a school play. He missed 2 bedtime stories once, for an emergency call with the Singapore team at 11 at night, once for a board dinner that ran 3 hours longer than scheduled. Both times he called Helen, and Helen came, and when he got home, Lily was asleep with a note on the pillow that said, "Dad, Gerald saved your spot. Love, L." He kept both notes, in the shoebox, with all the others. The company crossed $200 million in annual recurring revenue in month 19. Owen, the dry and precise head of engineering, who had once called drawing a line through a legal provision the most unhinged thing he'd ever witnessed, sent Ethan a text at 2 in the morning when the numbers confirmed, "I would like to formally revise my earlier characterization. That was the sanest thing you have ever done." The team had grown from 340 to 580 people. Rosa, who had been with him since the Craigslist server, was now Chief Product Officer. Marcus had taken the title of COO with the same quiet efficiency with which he did everything without ceremony, because the title had been true for years, and making it official was simply catching the paperwork up to the reality. Ethan rewrote the company values document twice more. Not because the first version was wrong, but because the company kept becoming more itself, and the document needed to keep up. The third version had a line that hadn't been in the first two. "We believe that the people who work here are whole people. Their families, their losses, their complications, and their joys. These are not liabilities to be managed. They are the source of everything we build." I didn't explain where that language came from. Most people didn't need the explanation. Some of them already knew the story. It had never fully gone away the way real stories don't. The ones that find the nerve and new people joining the company sometimes found it and sometimes came to him privately to say something about it. Usually not much. Usually just a look that communicated what they didn't have words for, and he would nod, and that would be enough. Lily turned 8 in the spring of the second year. She had a party in the backyard with 7 friends from school, and 1 friend from the neighborhood who was technically 9, and therefore in the social mathematics of childhood, slightly too old for this party, but whom Lily had insisted upon inviting because, as she explained, Mia is going through something, and I think she needs a party. Ethan did not ask what Mia was going through. He trusted the diagnosis. Helen came and stood on the porch with a cup of tea and watched 8 children destroy a piñata with the focused intensity of a military operation, and she said without looking away from the chaos, "She's more like her mother every day." "I know," Ethan said. "It must be hard sometimes," Helen said, "to look at her." He watched Lily, who was directing the piñata situation with the strategic calm of a small general positioning the blindfolded birthday girl for optimal strike angle, and thought about how to answer that honestly. "It used to be," he said. "Now it's mostly," he paused, "mostly like having her close, like she's not as far away as she should be." Helen put her hand on his arm for a moment. Just the fact of contact. Then she went back to her tea. Later after the party, after the friends went home, and the yard was littered with the colorful wreckage of a piñata, thoroughly defeated. Lily sat on the back steps with a piece of cake, and Gerald, who had been washed twice now and had lost a second eye, but was otherwise structurally sound, and she looked at the yard with the satisfied expression of someone surveying completed work. "Good party," she said. "Great party," Ethan said. He sat beside her on the steps. "Mia had fun," she said, eating cake. "I knew she would." "How did you know?" Lily gave him the look she sometimes gave him when she felt a question was simpler than he was making it. "Because she needed to." He nodded. "Fair enough." "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Gerald needs a new eye. We'll get him one." "Can it be a different color from the other one?" He looked at the rabbit, at the place where the second button eye had been. "Yeah," he said. "It can be whatever color you want." She considered this with appropriate seriousness. "Blue," she said. "Because Mom liked blue things." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and they sat on the steps together in the evening. In the yard that still smelled faintly of children and birthday cake, and the specific sweetness of a day that had been exactly what it was supposed to be. "Dad," she said again, quieter. "Yeah. I've been thinking about something." "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was organizing a thought that was bigger than usual, making sure it was right before she let it out. "When we went to that building," she said. "The shiny one. With the men in the suits." "Yeah. And the man with the Italian tie said that thing." She paused. "I heard it. I know you didn't think I did, but I heard it." He went still. I hadn't known. He'd told himself she hadn't. She'd been coloring. She'd been focused on the whale. She'd been 6 years old, in a room full of adults, and hadn't. But some part of him had always wondered if the pause of her pencil had meant what he'd thought it meant. "Baby." "I didn't mind," she said. Not defensively, just calmly, the way she stated facts. "Because you didn't let it matter. That's the part I remember. Not what he said. What you did after." He looked at his daughter, 8 years old. Blue dress replaced by jeans and a birthday sash that she was still wearing because she'd earned it and intended to wear it until she went to sleep. Gerald under her arm, cake on her fork. "What did I do after?" he asked, because he wanted to hear her version. "You kept going," she said simply. "You just kept going." The evening air moved. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. The sky was doing that thing it does in early spring, holding light longer than you expect, the particular lavender of a dusk that isn't ready to be dark yet. He didn't trust his voice for a moment. "Yeah," he said when he did. "I did." "That's what I want to do too," she said. "When things are hard, I want to just keep going like you do." He pulled her closer. She let him, leaning her head against his side, still eating her cake with the same calm deliberateness she brought to most things. "You already do that," he said. "You've been doing that." "I know," she said. "But I like having a word for it." The call from Richard Hawthorne came on a Thursday morning 14 months into the partnership. Ethan was in the middle of a product review when his personal cell lit up with the number. Not the Hawthorne Group's main line, not the legal team's relay number, but the direct line that Hawthorne had given him the day they signed, the one he'd said was for situations that require an actual conversation. Ethan stepped out of the meeting, walked to his office, closed the door. "Mr. Hawthorne?" "Ethan." The older man's voice was the same measured, authoritative, the voice that had spent decades in rooms where voices like that were the operating currency. But something was different about it. Something slightly looser than usual, like a knot that had been released one half-turn. "Is everything all right?" Ethan said. Yes, everything is fine. The numbers are..." A brief pause, the pause of a man who has looked at reports and is satisfied but doesn't love admitting satisfaction. "The numbers are very good." "They are," Ethan agreed. "I'm calling about something else." Ethan waited. "Margaret is coming to New York next month," Hawthorne said. "With the children, my grandchildren." Another pause. "She called me. She initiated it. We're going to..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "We're going to spend some time." Ethan sat with that for a moment. 35 years old, lives in Portland, 2 kids, doesn't talk to him much, kept the sunflower costume on all day. "That's wonderful," Ethan said, and meant it entirely. "I wanted to tell you," Hawthorne said. "I'm not entirely sure why. It's not a business matter." A pause that sounded to Ethan like a man in his 60s doing something he didn't have much practice at. "I suppose you told me something in that room without meaning to, and I've been sitting with it for over a year, and I thought you should know that it..." He paused again. "That it did something." Ethan thought about Margaret's email. "He asked me if I remembered it. I told him I did. He said he was sorry. 11 sentences. Something that didn't have to happen but did." "I'm glad," Ethan said. "She brought it up," Hawthorne said. "Margaret, when I called her after your meeting, I don't know what I said exactly. I was talking about the deal, about you, about the girl, about Lily," and Margaret said very quietly, "Dad, do you remember my school play, just like that, out of nowhere?" His voice was even, but something was working underneath the evenness, something that had been working for a long time. "And I said yes. And she said that I kept the costume on. And I said I know. And she said I just wanted you to know I remembered." The office was very quiet. She just wanted me to know she remembered, Hawthorne said again, like he was still turning it over, like a stone he kept finding in his pocket. She needed you to know, Ethan said gently. There's a difference. A long pause. Yes, Hawthorne said. I'm beginning to understand that. They talked for another few minutes about the APAC numbers, about the upcoming board meeting, about the 24-month review of the relocation provision that was approaching and that both of them seemed to have tacitly agreed was not going to result in a relocation requirement. When they hung up, Ethan sat in his office for a moment with the phone in his hand. I thought about all the rooms he'd been in over the past 2 years. All the meetings, all the decisions, all the documents signed and provisions negotiated, and milestones hit or missed and adjusted. All the Tuesday mornings and 5:45 a.m. lunches and bedtime stories and nighttime phone calls and shoebox notes. All the weight of it and all the privilege of it, which were not as different as they sometimes felt. He put the phone down. He picked up his pen. He wrote a note. Not a business note. A personal one, the kind he'd been writing in one form or another for 3 years, folded small and tucked into a lunchbox corner. He wrote, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's making lunch anyway." He read it. Crossed out the last part. Wrote, "It's making lunch." He looked at it. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket, because tonight was a school night, and tomorrow there would be a lunchbox to pack. On a Sunday evening in early November, 2 years and 3 months after the morning, a school plumbing failure had changed the direction of everything. Ethan and Lily sat on the back steps again. It was cold enough for jackets. Lily had Gerald, who now had 2 button eyes, one black, the original, and one blue, added carefully by Helen, with a needle and thread, on a Sunday visit, the blue of a ceramic bowl, the blue of a mother who had liked blue things. They were watching the last of the light go out of the sky. Lily had had a hard week. There had been a situation at school, a friend who'd said something unkind, the specific cruelty of 8-year-olds that isn't yet strategic enough to be malicious, but lands just as hard, and she had cried about it on Wednesday. Really cried the full version in the kitchen after school, with her face pressed into his shoulder, and he had held her and not tried to fix it, just held her, which was what she needed, and which he had learned slowly and imperfectly was sometimes the only thing. She'd been quieter than usual since then, working through it in the way she worked through things internally, methodically, with the occasional precise question that revealed she'd been thinking much harder than she appeared. She hadn't asked a precise question yet tonight. He was waiting. The sky went from lavender to gray to the deep blue that precedes dark. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Do you think things happen for a reason?" I thought about it. He always thought about her questions before he answered, because they always deserved it. "I think things happen," he said, "and then we make reasons. We figure out what they meant. And the meaning becomes real, even if it wasn't there to start." She considered this. "Like the meeting." "Like the meeting," he said. "The pipe broke," she said, "and I came with you, and now there's a whole different thing." She paused. If the pipe didn't break, different meeting, different outcome maybe, or the same maybe, hard to know. But Gerald would still have 2 black eyes, she said. He looked at the rabbit, at the black eye and the blue eye, at his daughter in her jacket in the November cold, working something through. "Yeah," he said. He would. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think it was worth it, the broken pipe." "Yeah, because of everything it made." She pulled Gerald closer. "Even the sad parts made good things happen. Margaret and her dad, the lady who sent you the email, Owen saying the thing about unhinged." She said it without smiling, though he smiled. "All of it came from one broken pipe." "And one little girl who said she could do that," he said. She looked at him. "I told you I could be good," she said. "And I was." "You were the best person in the room," he said, "by a significant margin." She absorbed this with the particular dignity of someone receiving accurate information. I know," she said. Then softer, "I was scared though." "Of what?" "That they wouldn't want you because of me." She said it to Gerald, not to him. The way she sometimes said the hard things sideways, so they were easier to release. That being my dad would make them say no. He put his arm around her. She leaned in. It almost did, he said, because she was 8 and she could handle the truth and she deserved it. But it didn't. But it didn't. Because you didn't let it, she said. Because we didn't let it. She thought about this. Then she nodded the same single decisive nod from the morning 2 years ago when he'd asked if she could be good in the meeting, and she'd said, "I can do that." Dad and meant it completely. "We're a good team," she said. "The best team," he said. She tilted her head up and looked at the first star, which had appeared in the darkening sky above the neighbor's rooftop while they were talking. "Mom's watching," she said. It was not a question, not a wish, just a fact she held the way she held all her important facts quietly with certainty, without requiring anyone else to confirm it. "Yeah," he said. "She is." They sat together in the cold, as the dark came in fully, as the yard disappeared into night around them, and the house behind them held its particular warmth. The warmth of a place where people have lived and loved and grieved and eaten popcorn from blue bowls and packed lunches at 5:45 in the morning, and left notes in shoeboxes. After a while, Lily said, "We should go in, it's cold." "Yeah." Neither of them moved for another moment. Then she tucked Gerald under her arm and held out her free hand to him. He took it, stood. They walked inside together into the light, and the back door closed behind them quietly on the cold and the dark, and the first star, and everything that had led them here, the broken pipe and the glass tower, and the men in expensive suits, and the whale with one purple patch, and the sunflower costume kept on all day, and the blue bowl and the shoebox full of notes, and all the 5:45 mornings, and all the miles between where they had been, and where they stood now, all of it outside in the night complete. Because Ethan Carter had walked into a room where powerful men measured a person's worth by what they were willing to sacrifice, and he had refused the transaction. He had refused it, not with anger, not with spectacle, but with the quiet, immovable certainty of a man who already knew what he was worth and what he was for. He had built a company and kept a daughter and honored a loss and made a life all at the same time, with the same 2 hands on the same ordinary mornings that kept arriving, whether he was ready or not. And in the end, the most revolutionary thing, Ethan Carter ever did the thing that changed rooms and contracts and fathers and daughters, and the private arithmetic of people who had been counting wrong, was simply this. He never once let the world convince him that the most important thing he was building wasn't the one who slept down the hall with a one-eyed rabbit and kept her father's notes in a shoebox and colored whales brave.